Hi everyone, you are listening to She Leads with Carly. Our guest today is Angie Westbrock. After years of experience in the food industry, primarily as a plant manager at top companies including Sara Lee, Candies and Bimbo Bakeries, Angie made a huge career transition into not only food tech, but also into a whole new industry as she is now the Vice President of Global Operations at Lyft. She shares her experience entering the workplace not only as a woman, but also as a mother. She shares the lessons in balancing both motherhood and work. Specifically, one lesson that she talks about is really being forgiving and gracious with yourself. We also chat about the importance of recognizing the value that can come from bringing a different perspective, whether it's being the only mother at a company or being unfamiliar with the industry as a whole. So many lessons from Angie. I really love this episode and I hope you do too. Hello, Angie. Thank you so much for joining She Leads today. I'm so excited to have you on the show and just get to hear your story and highlight your career. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course. Really happy to be here.
Of course. So Angie, you are the VP of Global Operations at Lyft. But prior to Lyft, prior to going into tech, you were a plant manager at these well-known brands. So Sara Lee, Bimbo Bakeries as a turn to from Sara Lee, and C's Candies. So we're going to get into all of that. And then you almost transitioned still in food, but then to tech more in an operational role now in HelloFresh, Habit. So we're going to get through all of that. But first, take me to, your college days. You got a degree in chemical engineering at University of Dayton. So at this point in your life, did you have your career set out for you? What were you thinking at this moment? And where did you see your future?
No, absolutely not. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I'm one of the first in my family to go to college. And so choosing a degree was, I just didn't even know what to choose. I was good in math and science and I went, okay, engineering sounds good.
Yeah.
In fact, I was so confused about how to use my degree in a way that I enjoyed that I was actually had a job completely unrelated to chemical engineering and finance lined up for my graduation. When I started doing my unit ops project, my senior year unit ops project on beer. And while I was trying to find out more information on beer, because this was back in the early 2000s, you couldn't just Google things back then.
Right.
You had to go to the library and find books on a topic, and there just wasn't a lot on our campus around brewing.
Yeah.
So I called Anheuser-Busch. They had a brewery in Columbus, Ohio, near where I was at. And I started asking questions. Within a couple of hours, they had a brewmaster from St. Louis that called to answer my questions, which was amazing. And that brewmaster said, well, hey, if you're interested in brewing, you should send us your resume. And I did. And I never thought I would hear from them. But a few months later, I did. And I had an amazing opportunity to work there in brewing and manufacturing for the first 6 years of my career. So amazing. I didn't ever imagine that I could use my degree for that, but it was incredibly applicable. And had I been able to design it, that's exactly what I would have done. But it just sort of happened by accident.
Wow, that's incredible. Just from your senior project. That's how the inspiration came. Incredible.
Yes, exactly.
And did you have mentors along the way at this time saying, maybe stick with finance, it's more secure, we don't really know, brewing is kind of a interesting industry that no one, was that a decision?
No, I would say it was the opposite. I was encouraged to use my degree. There was not a lot of women in engineering at the time. Still, I know that's a field that there tends to be less representation, particularly in manufacturing. There wasn't a lot of women in those fields either. And so I was encouraged to actually pursue different opportunities to apply my degree by my advisor at the time, who was an excellent mentor to me. But he was also supportive about taking my career a different path if I wanted to. But I was reluctant. I had the finance position lined up, but I wasn't super excited about it. Didn't actually feel like the right path. It felt like it was something to do while I tried to figure it out. And when I got the call from Anheuser-Busch, I just knew I was so excited. When I toured the brewery, I knew it was where I wanted to be. And I think it's important to just follow your gut and your passion and what you want to do. And when you know you're on the right path, you can feel it.
Yeah, I love it. So when you're at Anheuser, 6 years you mentioned. So in this time, was this, living up to the expectations? Were you at a great place in your career and you felt like this is where I could potentially stay for many more years? Or where were you at mentally where you were starting to kind of shift your focus?
Yeah, I mean, I loved it. In the 6 years I was there, I worked in St. Louis, Newark, New Jersey, and Williamsburg, Virginia.
Wow.
Anheuser-Busch was a world-class organization. They invested in training and their people. I am so lucky that I spent the first foundational years of my career there because it really trained me and gave me just a lot of skills that I have used since. But after about 6 years, I just started getting curious about what else I might be able to do. And that's when I started. And honestly, my my husband and I, at the time we were married, living in Virginia, and we just sort of got the itch to move to the West Coast. So we had done our honeymoon in Sonoma, and we sort of fantasized about moving out west and just decided to do it. So we both started applying for positions in either Seattle or San Francisco area. And although I live in the Bay Area now, we actually ended up in Seattle with Sara Lee.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up in the plant manager position. It was a great fit. I joked that it was beer with just less water. So I kept the carbs trend the first multiple years of my career. And I also was surrounded, also just very lucky to be surrounded by excellent mentors. My boss, who I had at Sara Lee for the entire 6 years I was there, although I was in 3 separate plants while I was there, was amazing and really helped me to develop into from middle management into senior leaders and how they think, being more strategic, understanding how to influence. And so I was ecstatic to have that experience. We were purchased by Bimbo when I was there. So we had to divest our Sara Lee and Earth Greens brands in California. And it was a very complicated process to do. And I got to be a part of the project to execute on that. So I learned a ton. It was very challenging from a logistics perspective. But then I also decided when I had the opportunity at See's Candies, I was like, Candy Factory, yes, let's go try that.
So cool.
So by then I'd been a plant manager. By the time I started at See's, I'd been a plant manager for, like 6 years, even though I was in my early 30s. And so when I started seeing meal deliveries pop up on the market, I got very excited because when I took the See's position, it was a very long commute. I had a 2-year-old at the time.
Okay.
And I knew that getting dinner on the table was going to be a massive problem and difficult. But I kept telling my husband, like, it's not cooking that's the problem. It's the planning. It's the like going to the grocery store. It's the figuring out. And at the time I was like searching for some sort of solution. Yeah. And that was right when meal kits were coming up on the market. And when I discovered Blue Apron and HelloFresh, I just became completely excited about that product. And I just wanted to get involved.
Wow.
And that's when I started pursuing opportunities in the meal kit deliveries. I saw HelloFresh had the opening. They were moving to the West Coast to launch. And I kind of took a leap to go into that position. And it was going from a very well-established history. It was a big change for me. I mean, I took a more than 30% pay cut to take that opportunity. And I had to spend a lot of time thinking about it. Like, is this what I really want? See's had a very compelling counteroffer that they gave when I had given my resignation, and I was very close to staying. And then I was just sitting on my couch one night before I was going to go into See's the next day to tell him I was staying. And I told my husband, I'm like, I just really want to do this startup thing. I'm pulled to it. And he was like, well, you got to do it then.
Yeah.
So I jumped in and I've never looked back. I love startups. I love the pace, the fast, like the dynamic nature of it. The challenge is very difficult. Oftentimes you're doing things that haven't been done yet.
Right. Yeah.
And the people that are drawn and that work in startups are very inspiring. So I have enjoyed my last, 5+ years in startups, and this is where I'm staying now.
Yeah. Okay. So Angie, I'm going to go back a bit because that's incredible. Like, it's just so cool to hear, these different transitions throughout your career. But first, before we even go into, tech, going to HelloFresh, tell me a little bit more about what a plant manager role entails, because it's so behind the scenes that people don't even, think about what a plant manager is. So tell me a little bit about your day-to-day and what made you a good plant manager.
Yeah, I mean, being a plant manager was so fun. And the reason I love operations and the reason I loved being particularly in the products that we were making is that it's this big team of people that are all working together to make a product that then you can go out and watch people enjoy.
Yeah.
Right. So you can go to a bar and watch people drink the beer that you're making. You can go out and to a grocery store and watch people kind of select your product on the shelf.
Yeah.
And so that's the spirit of it is a large team of people. And so these factories have, my teams in the bakeries were anywhere from 100 to a couple hundred people. And as the plant manager, you were responsible for hitting all of the metrics and ensuring that your employees were safe, right, that you had the right processes in place, that your production schedules were meeting demand, that quality was, we were meeting all quality standards, all food safety standards. So whenever you're especially in a food and beverage manufacturing facility, we of course are governed by the FDA, and there is a lot of compliance considerations to take into account. And so really as a plant manager, that's what was also very fun is it's a very broad scope. So you have to really be involved in every aspect of getting that product from ingredient to the store or to the ultimate place where the consumer is going to buy it.
Yeah, very cool. And so you mentioned at this time, around C's Candy, you had a 2-year-old daughter or son?
My son was first, yeah.
So 2-year-old son. And so I'm very curious, at this time, did you have other, female role models who were also new mothers or, who not even new mothers who had this experience where they can kind of like pass down their wisdom, or was there not really those who you can look up to and you kind of were, a little bit had to look to somewhere else to really have that inspiration?
At Sara Lee, there was still very few women, particularly in senior positions. And so, no, there wasn't a lot of examples there. And in fact, in the first 10 to 15 years of my career, for the most part, people that were in the same position as me were not only largely men, older men than me, but also many of them had stay-at-home wives that would take care of their children. And so one of the things that I had to do, and I think this is a really important part of being a woman that's moving in more senior positions, and maybe if you're in an industry or you don't have a lot of examples of people doing it, one of the things I had to tell myself is that I'm probably just not going to do this job in the same way they do. And that's okay. And so you can sort of get yourself into you can convince yourself that you don't want a particular job because you see somebody in it completely unlike you. Yeah. And you think, well, I can't do it then, because if I want a family or if I want to be home for dinner, then this person's never home for dinner. Therefore I can't do this job. But the point is that when you take a position, the way that I led as a plant manager, especially my first plant manager position, I was 27 years old, was completely different than the way a very experienced male was going to be doing that same job. Both are effective, right? But our styles, our priorities were completely different, and so that was something like a switch I had to make very early on. Now, when I went to C's, it was one of the reasons I was drawn to that company is because there was a leadership team that was filled with really brilliant women as well. Right. And I was drawn to that. And there I had some peers that had children. The CFO was returning from maternity leave, and she was carrying her bag with all of her pumping materials coming in every day. And I related to it because I remembered, when I went back to work in the bakeries after having my son, there was no place to pump. Like you had to, I luckily had an office, but I would put paper over the window. Sometimes I went in my car, and these were, there just wasn't the same facilities or ability to accommodate like there is in some other places.
And then you mentioned how, it's a different style, but it could be just as effective. Did that take, some time for you to realize that it could be, just as effective, even if it's different? Because I feel like it's easy to fall under that trap being like, they're there, not going home for dinner, not feeding their children, or whatever it is. And so they're going to be more effective in that role. But did that take time for you to kind of adjust to that mindset?
I think I was just so lucky to have the leaders at Sara Lee that I did. Okay. my boss, who was the RVP of the West region, and then his boss, who is the vice president of operations for all of Sara Lee, were just so supportive. And they gave me the confidence and the ability to do that. And so I think this is really the as men have as much to contribute to creating an inclusive environment and allowing women to succeed, is to provide that support and comfort level and acceptance.
Yeah.
That my style was different, and they embraced it and encouraged it even.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get on to Lyft and where you are now, you mentioned, so, you kind of, based on your career, you're really led by your passions. The passion for brewery led you to Anheuser, and then HelloFresh. You saw these meal delivery kits, Blue Apron, and you were like, I want to be involved in that. So hearing this, I could also, for me, having a 2-year-old son and going into startups, getting a 30% pay cut, like those are a lot of risks involved. Compared to staying at C's, having a great counter offer, all of that. How did you kind of balance that where, your passion ultimately drove you and you told your husband, look, like I need to be involved in this versus, I have a new baby, we're gonna, this could be very risky. We don't know if it's going to do well. Hello for all of that. So how did you kind of deal with that or decide?
I think one of the things that I learned, and it's really important to understand that when you have a child and you become a mother, if that's the path that you choose, the feelings that you have after having a baby are just very personal, very different from person to person. And you really don't know what you're going to think until you have one, right? And so, as driven and as ambitious as I am, I also loved maternity leave, and I loved being home with my son. I was never somebody that was like, making spreadsheets at home or what. I mean, I loved it. I can relax with the best of them, and I can rock a baby all day long.
Yeah.
But what happened when I returned to work is that I discovered that now, in order to justify being away from my child, I actually wanted a more fulfilling career. So instead of what I thought is that I was going to want something that was like more comfortable, more predictable, and actually the opposite happened, where I found like, hey, if I'm actually going to work and be away from my kid all day, then it has to be fulfilling on a lot of levels. And so that's why following my passion and being very excited and engaged with my work became even more important.
Yeah. And I know you're passionate about the idea where it's very easy for, now in society, like this show, this is kind of what I'm highlighting, the idea where it's not just, being a mom versus being a badass in work as well. So you kind of are the epitome of the idea where you can be an incredible mother and, be such a like VP of Global Ops at Lyft. So how did you kind of like you yourself learn that it could be two ways? And what advice can you give someone who, is entering their career but also wants to have a child someday down the line? And it's kind of, you have to navigate that in your career. So how do you really navigate it?
One of the things that I think is incredibly important that took me a while to learn is that you have to be very forgiving and gracious with yourself. So as a new mother returning to work, I remember every day, literally in my head, giving myself a pass or a fail. If I was late to daycare pickup because I was stuck in a meeting or, I would just feel like I failed as a mother. And when I was at work and I got the call that, he had a fever and I had to go get him and I had to just drop everything and leave, I felt like I failed at work. And I was struggling to really feel like I was giving anybody the right amount of attention. And one day I don't even know, I guess I was driving home and I was giving myself a pass or fail for the day. And I just thought, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. I'm doing the best I can. I'm looking at my son. My son is happy.
Yeah.
Look at him, like he's thriving. I'm looking at work. My team is thriving. So I really just had to reset expectations in my mind about what good and what success looked like. And once I did that, it was a big unlock for me.
Yeah.
And I try to tell other people that I think it's something we have to go through. We are so critical on ourselves as mothers. When I returned to work after having Tommy, I struggled with pumping. I couldn't get enough milk. And I just felt like I was failing, and I was devastated that I couldn't continue to provide him breast milk. And then one day I had to supplement with formula because I didn't have enough milk, and he was perfectly fine. And he was like, he had the bottle, he smiled at me, and I was like, what am I doing? Why am I killing myself over this?
Yeah.
So the other thing I will say is that even I still struggle with that sometime. But when I was ready to have a second child, I kept putting it off. And one of the reasons I kind of quickly left Seas and went into HelloFresh is I was like, I want to have another baby. I need to be at the company that I'm at for a year before I think about having another baby. And so I'm doing all of these calculations in my mind that all of these conditions that have to be met before I have my second child. And it turns out when Habit called and I was recruited for that job, I was 6 months pregnant with Nora. So crazy. Completely unplanned. I was interviewing, and I remember interviewing. I had a phone interview at first, and I said, hey, this job is amazing. It's perfect for me, and I'm perfect for it. But I have a bit of a timing issue that I need to discuss with you. Yeah. And they said, what's that? I said, well, at the time I was 5 months pregnant, and they appreciated the transparency. They continued to invite me to interview. I got the job offer. And I started when I was about almost 7 months pregnant.
Crazy.
And so you think that you're going to plan these things, and you think that you're going to everything is going to work out the certain way that you predict it, and it was amazing, and it was great.
Yeah. And from that story, it's also just recognizing that we're often our biggest critique. We're the one that's putting the most pressure on ourselves, giving ourselves the highest expectations, and yeah, I love that story. I think it's incredibly valuable. So, okay, so now tell me, transitioning to, tech startups, from Habit now to Lyft. So, where did you discover Lyft? And it's also kind of this first transition from the food, beverage industry to now completely different. So tell me this transition.
So we were in the middle of working on an exit at Habit. So I knew I was going to be looking for an opportunity within the next probably 6 months or so. And I ended up getting a random inbound from Lyft. And I wasn't, at the time we were very busy. We were working on the deal, and I just couldn't even entertain interviewing.
Yeah.
But I saw this LinkedIn message from Lyft, and I went, Lyft? That's kind of interesting. I have to just talk to them to see what this is about, right? Yeah. And they'd initially reached out to me thinking about the bikes and scooters business. And we were talking through that, and that opportunity happened to be in New York at the time, and I wasn't interested in relocating. But through our conversation, they said, we have these other positions that might be open, the RVP of the West. And I said, oh, tell me more. And as we got to talking about it, I hung up the phone, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So I continued the interview process, and part of the interview was a presentation. Mm-hmm. And you had to present what your plan would be. At the time, I think I was given a prompt about driving market share growth or something. And as I researched and I was preparing this presentation, I just could not stop obsessing over this problem and the two-sided marketplace, just all of the complexities of the business. And I just got very excited about it. While I was interviewing, I was incredibly impressed by all of the people I had the opportunity to have discussions with. Yeah. The team was amazingly strong. And all of that just drew me to jumping into this opportunity and trying something different. Yeah. The second piece is that I am really motivated by the socioeconomic impact of Lyft. And I think about what an opportunity is given through the gig economy. And in my childhood, when our family had some hard times, if those opportunities would have been available, it would have been completely life-changing. And so that is also a huge motivation for me, and why I really enjoy working in this company with Lyft's emphasis and focus on supporting the driver community. Yeah. So that has been fulfilling and allowed me to sort of satisfy a different passion for once.
Incredible. Yeah. So you, again, driven by the passion, and now the mission as well is a big part of it too. So you're at Lyft. How was that transition, from being a plant manager to now VP of Global Ops? in this whole new field, I'm sure skills from being a plant manager and at a HelloFresh habit all translated over, but what were like some of the challenges that you had in this pivot?
I think one of the challenges is, and I tell this to other people that come into, and I think this is applicable to particularly many women in fields as they navigate their career. I have a very different background than most people at Lyft. Most people don't have a manufacturing background and come in and work in ops. And what that means is that I have a very different perspective. So I do bring a different point of view, a different experience to the table. And that is all part of diversity and diversity of thought, which I think can be very exciting. Yeah. And sometimes, you can feel it can be a little bit scary to have a differing point of view and to be sort of different than the rest of the team you're working with. But I found my team to embrace it. And now I really try to tell people that as well. When I bring somebody in with a completely different background, I say, hey, listen, I brought you here because you're different and you think different. Yeah. So tell me, speak up, like bring your voice to the table because that's why we want you here. And when you have, what I find in tech, which is really awesome, is when you have people with all different backgrounds and product and operations interacting to solve problems together, you get to this really innovative, creative space where you each influence and help mold the other person, the way they're thinking, and you get to this totally new solution that would have never existed before, which is very, very exciting and fun.
Yeah, and I think that teaches so much from both perspectives. Even like, me as a new grad or anyone entering a role, it's almost like don't get discouraged by having a different background, or you can kind of use that as a value, Absolutely. As a valuable tool to be like, what, I have a different perspective that I can provide. So I love that. I think that's incredibly valuable. So, okay, Angie, we're going to move to fun questions, finish off. But this has been so great. So first, thank you so much for coming on the show. But first, tell me, what's a passion that you have that's completely unrelated to any work or anything, just a different passion?
Well, although it's kind of related to the first part of my career, food and beverage, but in the more social setting. Yeah. So food and wine and having, cooking, those are all things that I really, really enjoy. Even home cooking. So on most Sundays, particularly in the winter, I love just spending all day in the kitchen and making a big meal for my family and sitting down and having a glass of wine and talking and enjoying friends and family. So that's really probably the driving passion in my life, I think.
I love that. Sounds like my family, honestly. We love food. We love those family meals. Okay, last question is, what is a fun or weird talent that no one really knows about? So a hidden talent, but I'm going to go first. Okay, Angie, so what I do is I throw blueberries up and catch them in my mouth. So this is my hidden talent. All right, it's not so hidden anymore, but it's okay. There we go.
Oh, you got it. That was high, too. That's impressive. Yeah. Really good. I can't do that.
Thank you.
Okay, so hidden talent. I don't know if I have maybe a hidden fun fact.
Cool. Yeah.
Is that my eyes tend to change color with my mood.
What?
So my family knows that. Yeah, if the greener they are, the more you want to give some space.
That's crazy.
The bluer, the more approachable. Yeah. So.
Wow. And how did you discover this? Like, how did this?
Really, my husband has pointed it out more than once, so he knows for sure.
Oh my goodness! I wish we all had that. That would be a great fun fact.
Huge. Yeah, exactly.
All right, Angie, thank you again for coming on the show. It's been so valuable, so inspiring just to hear from you and everything. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I love being here. Love what you're doing. Keep it up. Thank you so much.